the initial report was that the children were left in the car. However, I can tell you, without going into too much detail, unfortunately, I'm not able to go into too much detail, there just are some inconsistencies with the story that we're being given.
2 children are dead, and their mom is now in custody, but there are a lot of questions that are still unanswered in this story. Law enforcement in Texas says the story the mom is giving them just isn't adding up. What we know about what happened to the 3- and 6-year-old siblings after their mom told police they died in a hot car in Texas. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. It always gets your attention when a member of law enforcement, especially a sheriff, goes on camera and says that they are not getting the whole story, that there are inconsistencies with what they're being told. And that's what the sheriff in Bexar County, Texas, that's where San Antonio is located, is saying about Tiona Islar. She's 28 years old, and she was the mom to 2 children. 3-year-old Miani Islar and 6-year-old Savani Stevenson. Here's a picture of the 2 of them together. Savani, the sheriff says, had autism. Now, looking at this picture, it breaks your heart knowing that these 2 children lost their lives last weekend on Saturday. Here's what we know at this point. And again, the sheriff says a lot of the information that he is getting from the mom in this case allegedly is just not adding up, and this is why. So let's go to 3:30 on Saturday last week in Bexar County, where deputies responded to the home of Tiona Islar. Now, the sheriff says that these 2 children, they were found dead inside the home. The deputy actually tried to save both kids by doing CPR, but Savani and Miani both passed away. Now, the sheriff says that Tiona Islar, their mom, told authorities that she had found her kids inside her car outside. It was in the low 90s in the San Antonio area on Saturday last week. And Tiona said that she had not seen the kids for hours. So the story that she has given law enforcement is that she fell asleep around 10 o'clock in the morning, and then she woke up around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, roughly 5 hours later. And when she woke up, she could not find her kids. She claims that she found those 2 children in her car. And then she says, according to the sheriff, that she brought the kids inside the home, and it was about 20 minutes after she found her kids in the car, she says, that she called 911, and that is when Bexar County Sheriff's deputies responded. Now, that story, according to the sheriff, raised some red flags.
As I mentioned, the initial report was that the children were left in the car. However, I can tell you, without going into too much detail, unfortunately, I'm not able to go into too much detail, there just are some inconsistencies with the story that we're being given, that at present, I'm not confident enough to give you all that that's definitively what happened. So at this point, we've taken the mother of the 2 children downtown. She's being questioned at present. She is being mostly cooperative with us at this point, and so what we're hoping for is that in talking to her, it may be able to shed some more light on the situation. But as I mentioned, with the inconsistencies that I'm seeing in the story, and in some of the evidence, we're just not prepared to say that that's exactly what happened.
In this news conference, in the hours after these 2 young kids were found and had passed away, before charges were filed, the sheriff was asked how long he thinks the children were in the car.
So according to the initial information that we have, the last time the mom reports having seen the children was about 10 o'clock this morning when she fell asleep. And then around 3 o'clock is when the children were found, reportedly. But again, with some of the details that we're seeing, just something's not adding up with this case. And so while I'm certainly not prepared to say we're going to be making any arrests at this point, right now it's just too soon to tell.
Is he the only one there at the residence?
From my understanding right now, from what we're gathering, there's the mom and the 2 children. And the last time that the children were seen was inside the residence. But then when she reports finding them was after 3 p.m. in the car.
One thing in covering these stories, sheriffs or whoever be the member of law enforcement speaking to the media, they are very purposeful with their words in news conferences like this. And you can tell that the sheriff is being very careful to not say whether they believe the children were actually in the car at all. And he's really just telling the media the story that he has been told by the mom, Tiona Islar. Now, hours after the sheriff made those statements, the mom, Tiona Islar, was arrested. Here she is in custody. This is a video that was actually put out by the Bexar County Sheriff. It was put out on social media. We know that Islar is charged with 2 counts of serious injury to a child with serious bodily injury or death, and she's being held right now on a total of $300,000 bond. There's $150,000 bonds on each of the 2 counts that she is facing. Right now, it's unclear what the inconsistencies are in her story that the sheriff is speaking about. He wouldn't go into more detail about that, but it's also not clear what the children's causes of death are at the time of this recording. The sheriff did say that this family was known to Child Protective Services.
There are some early indicators that there had been some issues with regard to this family involving possibly the Bexar County Sheriff's Office and possibly calls to CPS. And so again, anybody that may have information to share or video of the area around that time, anytime between 10 a.m. this morning and 3 p.m. this afternoon, please give us a call, 210-335-6000. You can also email us at bcsotips@bear.org, and you can remain anonymous if you do so choose to call us or to send us an email.
I was going to ask you how many times BCSO has been out to this home before.
I don't know that we've physically been out to this home a whole lot of times, but from what we can find, there's at least one call for service that involved CPS having become involved. And obviously, anytime CPS becomes involved, it's because there's suspicions of some sort of child neglect going on. So right now, we're going through the records. The medical examiner, we're still waiting on the medical examiner to arrive. The CPS investigator just arrived on scene, and so we're right now at present comparing notes to see what can be found.
I put Tiona Islar's name into truthfinder.com to try to learn a little more about her. Now, the sheriff in Bexar County said that she had only been in Texas for about 14 months, so less than a year and a half. We did see that she has a previous address out of South Carolina, where family members on social media we have seen have been memorializing the 2 children that were lost in this tragedy. At Law&Crime, we partner with Truthfinder, and we use it to get details on the people who are involved in our stories. But look, even if you don't work in true crime, it can be a great tool to give you some peace of mind because it's one of the largest public records search services in the United States. And with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. I reached out to the Department of Family and Protective Services in Texas to see if they could provide more information on the interactions that they have had with Tiona Islar and her children in the past. The organization has confirmed to media outlets that, yes, they have had previous contact with the family, but they are not going into more detail about that. Now, the sheriff said that Islar was the only person living with the 2 kids in the house, and the family had only been in Bexar County for about 14 months, less than a year and a half, and was already known to Child Protective Services. Of course, a lot of questions still remain unanswered there. We did find a previous address for Islar in South Carolina. There is a GoFundMe right now called Support Savani and Mayani's Final Journey, and it says it is raising money to bring the children back to South Carolina. Joining us now to talk about this is retired NYPD Detective David Sarney. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. This case, certainly hot car deaths. It's a problem across the country, but it seems like before we get to the fact that she said it was in a hot car, that these 2 kids, 3 and 6 years old, passed away, just based off what the sheriff was saying, it seems like it's not entirely clear whether the kids actually were in the car.
Yeah, that's the problem when you're talking about this whole case. You're basically on the mother's word that she fell asleep at 10, wakes up at 3, finds them in the car, then takes them out of the car, both of them unresponsive, and then police didn't respond, and first responders respond, EMS, and by then it's too late. So here's the issue: it's about the hours long gap in between. And I guarantee you, if you're law enforcement, when you're dealing with a situation, you're not only dealing with the possible abuse and the deaths of these kids, you're also looking at anything else around you. And what you might have seen around them is, what did the house look like? What kind of state of repair was it in? Was it a disarray? What was in the refrigerator? Because I know when ACS in New York, with the Administration of Children's Services comes in, they check fridges, they check all the areas to see if it's clean, if there's food for the kids. So these are all going to come into play dealing with the mother who's making these claims that She just fell asleep at 10, wakes up at 3, and then goes to the car. And that's why the investigators are not just going to take her word for it, but take an overall perspective of this house and of the mother.
And listen, I mean, people's at-home lives, you know, when it's not criminal, I mean, everybody's a little bit different. It did strike me as a little odd that on a weekend, you're the sole provider for these two kids, and you're going to bed at 10 o'clock, and then you're sleeping for 5 hours on a Saturday. I mean, I don't know if she works nights. I don't know what the circumstances are around it. It just seemed like that seemed like something that would be, if I was, you know, and I don't know what it's like to be an investigator, but that would just be something that'd be interesting. When it comes to questioning someone like this, and you're trying to figure out what actually happened, what are some of the questions you ask, and what are you listening for?
Well, if she's making the claims that they got into the car, was the car open? Was there access to get into the car? Was there access to get out of the car? You know, what type of car is it? Can they lock themselves in the car? It all comes to things which you're going to look at as the interview takes place. You're going to look at the vehicle, and if she's saying they were in the car, you're going to look at the car and determine whether or not the kids were in the car at that time and didn't have a way of getting out. Because you could talk to her. Again, it's all about developing some sort of rapport with the person, because they are under suspicion, but not necessarily arrest. So you just want to get a storyline to time up with that. And that's why the 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock is so interesting, that she knew she went to bed at 10 and then woke up at 3. So how would you know it was 10 o'clock when you fell asleep, and how you know it was 3 o'clock when you woke up? And what did you do when you woke up? What was the first thing you did? If you said you were asleep, what was the first thing that you did? So these are things get into the storyline, because then you want to see if there's evidence to refute what she says or to confirm what she says. And the problem is, at this point, you're going to be based on her 5 hours, and these kids, and not only that, when the kids are found, she's saying in the car, she took them out of the car. And that's something like, you know, I would go, how would you get out of the car if you had two of them? You know, 1's 6, 1's 3, regardless. You know, what did you do when you took them out of the car? Did you call the police right away? And why would you take them out of the car if they were unconscious? Wouldn't you call the police? At that point, these are things that will come into play at that. So that's why this investigation, and that's why, you know, we're talking about an autopsy when you find out the cause of death, you know, eventually the manner of death will come out. It's going to be based on the investigation of the investigators at that time about the manner, you know, the manner of death. Is it a homicide? Is it something else?
Because I think too, you know, and sadly we've had these cases of hot car deaths, and that is an entirely important conversation to have about parents making sure you don't leave your kids intentionally or unintentionally in a car in hot weather in a place like Texas. But in this case, the idea that she would have brought the kids out of the car and then into the house and then calls law enforcement, that doesn't seem to line up with a lot of, you know, and every case is unique and different, and I don't mean to speculate, but it just seems like that's not something you often see in these cases.
No, and not only that, these are two children. Two. So, you know, this is why they must have been, they had to be confined in some part of their day to both be at this position where they're now believed to be unconscious in the car. It comes back to the same thing when you talk about the only person who's alleged witness, who is the alleged suspect, is the mother. So that's why you're going to do that. You know, a deep dive, you look at the house, you know, disarray and all the like, but it's about food, it's about prior complaints, which we know she had one, we don't know what it is. What was the follow-up as a result of that contact with Children's Services in the county? What we look at that and seeing where that goes. Because right now, you have, unfortunately, 2 dead children that, you know, law enforcement has to figure out what happened. And the coroner is going to determine based on what they found as a possibility. And then the investigators' information and facts of what they have will have to determine that. That's why this is right now, based on her information, it's accidental. But we're going to look to determine, is that factual or is that what she's saying, and the evidence does not bear to the fact that it's accidental, it was intentional.
We've seen cases too involving hot cars where you know, someone accidentally left, gosh, like, and you just think of the terror of this happening, but somehow, you know, there's examples of parents or guardians who forget that their kid is in a car seat and that child then dies, and we see that person face charges. In this case, if she is telling the truth, she fell asleep, she's a deep sleeper, she slept for 5 hours, you know, these children then walk outside, maybe the door was unlocked, they're able to get in, it's a hot day in Texas, that door closes, they don't know how to get out, those children pass away, and everything she says lines up to be true. Is that a criminal case that she would be dealing with, or is it just a terrible, if you're law enforcement, it's just a terrible, terrible circumstance to happen?
Yeah, well, we had an incident in the Bronx like that where a father had his 2 kids in the car. He left the kids in the car, comes back, he forgot his children were in there. The initial response by law enforcement was they were in the car, they were found dead. He was responsible because he had them in the car. He was arrested for it. Eventually, he was not found liable for that death. I mean, that's something, as a parent, I can't imagine having to live with the fact that you killed your 2 kids because you forgot they were in the car. It's going to be based on that information that she has. And like I said, this is the issue you have. She has a prior complaint. What's the relationship? What was the outcome of that with the social worker or caseworker that was dealing with her? Not only that, now you're going to look at, how her, going to talk to, they're 6 and 3. They may not have gone to school. Have they gone to any daycare? You're going to talk to people around the neighborhood or in the area. What you saw as a relationship with the mother to the children. Was this a punishment factor that you put them in the car and lock the door? Because that's sometimes people, what they'll do is they want to punish their kids and there's no place to go. You put them in, it's kind of a timeout. And that timeout, which may or not be true, she left them in the car and fell asleep and then realized they're dead and pulled them out of the car. There was a lot of things coming into play, but unfortunately, it's going to come to the medical examiner's determination of their cause of death and coupled with the facts of the case, whether that will be a murder, accidental type of death.
I also think too, it seems like from just pictures we've seen from the scene and where the sheriff gave his news conference, they were living in kind of a new build type community of condos, it seems. And when I see that, I think that someone has to have a Ring doorbell, and they might have some surveillance to be able to piece things together. And maybe someone was looking outside or was outside and saw her run to the car and saw this play out. If the cause of death comes back and it shows that these children died of heat exhaustion, and that kind of lines up with her story, but then what she's saying doesn't make sense, what do you do next?
Well, that's where you have to really follow up on any of the things that you're saying, any surveillance, any interviews with people, with neighbors. All those things have to come into play. But and this is where it comes down to. They've charged her now. Can they charge her with murder? It will be based on what they determine the facts of the case. And since she's been arrested, she has a right to an attorney, so you're not going to be able to talk to her anymore. I don't think the attorney is going to allow that conversation to take place. So you're going to have to build upon what you have available at that crime scene. The car itself. Is it a self-locking car? How does a car lock? These are things that come into play on that end. And that's why that in the interviews of friends and anyone else she has, relatives, whatever it's going to be, whoever you can find, is what is the relationship between her kids and that car. She's saying the car locked. They were in the car and they couldn't gain access to the car. That's why the car is important. You're going to say, how did they lock the door? This is why you work when you have her available prior to the arrest. You want her to give you everything about the dealings with her kids. When you have them in the car, what do you do? Has it ever happened that this happened before? Where they got locked in the car? What dates? What times? Things of those questions will come up. And that's why that initial interview is so important, because even though you suspect her, you want to make sure that she gets you the proper timeline, so then you can go back to evidence that you have to refute or confirm what she said to you. And that car, she's saying they were in the car. Okay, they're in the car. You pulled them out of the car. Where were they sitting in the back of the car? Where were they seated in the car when you took them out? How did you get them out of the car? That came into play. That should be the initial questions prior to then the eventual arrest.
What does it tell you? This sheriff, and he's I would say he's a media-friendly sheriff. I've seen interviews that he's done before. He was on scene giving this news conference and wouldn't go into detail about what he felt were inconsistencies with the mom's story. But the fact within a couple hours, he's in front of TV cameras and he feels comfortable to say that. Because once you say, we find her story inconsistent and there are red flags, a lot of times I hear that it's likely there are going to be charges coming. What does that tell you about how big those inconsistencies were to get a member of law enforcement to go public with saying, we just at this point don't believe certain parts of what she's saying?
Well, they're big enough because, go back to, how law enforcement makes arrests based on probable cause. Was the information enough that she told you that makes the inconsistency valid? And then you confer with the prosecutor's office and say, this is what we have. Can we charge her? And they'll say yes or no. That's what will happen. In this case, they believe there was enough that she said, because it just doesn't make sense. Within that 5 hours, your 2 kids are dead. And with that in mind, you have her there, you've interviewed her, you have 2 kids who cannot speak for themselves. What evidence shows that she may be inconsistent? And right then and there, you do with endangered welfare of a child, because that's why if you look at the house, that could give you another piece to that part of the puzzle. Can you charge with this? But now there's more to it, and this is why we see this case. It'll really determine the fact is, if they had died of heat exhaustion, okay, we have that. What did we have to confirm the fact that these kids were in the car for 5 hours? And that's where it's going to come into play with the ME and that investigator. And the sheriff felt they were comfortable with the arrest. And based on all of this, there shouldn't be a problem, because they're in your care. Your kids are dead. They're not infants where there could be a possible sudden death. Sid's case. These are 2 kids that died in your care. Something you did was problematic. What's the problem? You fell asleep and apparently let the kids go into the car and then found them in the car. But I'll tell you, just thinking about this, if you had your 2 kids unconscious in the car and you pull them out, why don't you call 911 right away? That's the back of my head as investigator, and that would have been a question you had brought up.
Well, because I think it was about 20 minutes. It's been reported from, she wakes up, says that she finds the kids, rushes them into the house. I hear that maybe because I think it was in the low 90s in Texas. Maybe she's trying to get them into the air conditioning. Maybe, that's, something that, if you want to believe what she's saying, like, you could be thinking. But at the same time, 20 minutes is a long time before you call EMS. It's not necessarily even if you're worried about the police, but that's a pretty good chunk of time. What typically is the window that, clearly it would be automatically call 911, but at what point for a member of law enforcement does that window, no matter the explanation, just not make sense?
It doesn't make sense that your 2 kids are unconscious in the car and you took them out unresponsive. That means you picked them up, took them into the house, and they were unresponsive. And you waited to determine that was, they're not breathing, they're not able to breathe, or if they're breathing, it's extremely shallow. You'd be calling 911 immediately if that's your concern. Or did you mess up, screw up so badly that you're trying to figure out your storyline, and now call the police and say this is the story? Because, and I go back to this, if it's one child, you can almost go into that issue of recklessness or whatever. But with 2 children, it's criminal. But now, is it murder? Did she intend these 2 kids to die? Did she punish those kids to put them in the car for whatever reason, and then comes back a couple hours later and finds them dead? Because the sleep issue is the other problem. She fell asleep at the most appropriate time, that she went to sleep at 10 and woke up at 3, and that's how she found they were dead, or found them unresponsive. Because police started working on both of the kids, but I don't know to the extent of how much they were alive at that point. But 5 hours in a car, if that's what she's saying, you wouldn't do this to a dog. You wouldn't do this to anybody. And as a 6 and a 3-year-old, I don't know that they would not know how to open or close the door. So did they lock the door? Where is the key to that car? Where do you keep the key to the car? How do you leave that car? Do you leave it unlocked all the time? Do you leave it locked all the time? Tell me your whole process in the car. These are the questions, again, that will help determine what happened.
If it's a newer vehicle, a lot of them lock on their own. And a lot of people probably don't even think about that in terms of that just being something that cars do. I don't know what type of model it was, or if it was, that's probably speculating a little bit, but that's something I'd be thinking about as well. Lastly, we know that she was known, and that's the sheriff's words, to the Department of Family and Children's Services, I believe it's called, in Texas, but the Child Protective Services organization for the state of Texas. She had only lived in Texas for 14 months, they said, and they were already known. Now, there's a lot of things that we don't know what it's about, speculate to, but typically if someone is known, what do they mean? Could that have been something, her son with special needs, they were known to the organization because they were helping her because he had special needs? Is it always something criminal when you hear a member of law enforcement point that out?
No, but it just adds a part of the story, and I think that's what you're dealing with. These people, it just didn't come out of a bubble. She was involved somehow. They can't disclose that information, which is fine. You can't disclose it, that's fine. But I guarantee you they're talking to the caseworkers, they're talking to Child Services to determine what happened there, because that, will be part of the case entirely. What was the reason that you got involved? What type of situation? Does it have to be criminal? Not particularly. It could be, not improper care, slight neglect, whatever they could determine. But that's where the next thing would be is what you did at that house when you got there at that scene. You're dealing with trying to revive these kids, resuscitate these kids, but the aftermath is when you cannot. How is that crime scene held? And that, when you talk about the ACS, it would be the child services aspect that's very important.
Yeah, and we'll see how this case plays out. I mean, really at the end of the day, if she's telling the truth, you feel terrible for her because she lost her kids. And if she's not telling the truth, I think law enforcement will figure that out, and we'll have to wait and see. Retired NYPD Detective David Sarney, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, and stay safe.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.